Notice how I got you to clap for me? Hi everyone, welcome to the Darrel McLeod by the Vancouver Public Library. My name is Chezgh'un and I'm the head of cultural programming here. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we're hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. There we go. And I want to share that I'm an immigrant from Mexico, which means I'm a settler in these lands. And that for me means that I have a special responsibility to continually learn about the ongoing effects of colonialism in this part of the world. And to do my best as a public servant to reflect that knowledge and that awareness in the type of work that I do and the type of speakers that I program, and to take that into my personal life as well. So on that note, I am very excited that we get to have Darrel McLeod here. As many of you probably here in the audience share this thought, is I've been following his work and his writing for many, many years. And it's always very exciting to read his storytelling. So it's an absolute honor to welcome him back to the library. And a quick show of hands, who was here for when we launched his previous book, Payaka, upstairs in the Montalbano? Great, 2 of you, 3, 4, fantastic, that's great. Who's never been in this room? A few of you, great, we need to do better marketing. That's wonderful. Well, we do a lot of events all the time, so I hope you keep coming back. A few housekeeping notes. The bathrooms are located right outside that door to the right. They're right there, so you can use them as many times as you want. We're not the opera nor the ballet, so you can come in and out as many times as you want. My only favor that I'll ask you is please use the door in the back, because that one's less disruptive to the stage. If you forget, don't worry, but please try to remember to use the one in the back. The second thing I would want to ask you as a favor is please take a moment to silence your cell phones. You don't have to turn them off. In fact, keep them on. I want you to take pictures and tweet about this, put it on Instagram, tell the world you're at a very cool library event, so you can keep them on, just make sure they're not a symphony of noise inside your pocket. And the third thing I want to share with you is that our friends from Massey Books are right here selling books. That's Patricia Massey right there. Yay! Good morning. One of the most incredible booksellers in the city, if not in the country, so they're selling copies of the book. Buy 1, buy 2, buy 5. They make amazing gifts. And so now I'm going to introduce the speakers tonight, and I'm going to get off the stage because you're not here to listen to me. So Darrel McLeod is Cree from Treaty 8 territory in northern Alberta, and he is the author of Payaka and Mamaskatch, which received the Governor General's Literary Award for nonfiction. And so before deciding to pursue writing in his retirement, McLeod was a chief negotiator of land claims for the federal government and an executive director of education and international affairs with the Assembly of First Nations. Darrel also holds degrees in French literature and education from UBC. And Sheila Rogers worked as a radio broadcaster with the CBC for 43 years until her retirement earlier this year, making her one of Canada's most recognized voices on radio. I imagine all of you have heard her shows. Yeah, a lot of fans. And for the last 15 years, she hosted The Next Chapter, which was CBC's radio's award-winning weekly magazine show on Canadian authors and literature. Sheila is also a member of the Métis Nation of Greater Victoria. So now, please join me in welcoming Darrel and Sheila on stage.
It's almost nice when you can keep the applause going the whole way. And the options tonight were incredible. Like, it's the opening night at the Vancouver Film Festival. There's some sports thing going on. Also, the Compañía Rosia Molina is here from Spain.
I saw it last night, it was amazing.
Hi, Yvonne! Hello. I did too. It was really fantastic. So thank you so much for making this choice. And I am so delighted to be here with my friend Darrel McLeod, celebrating his first novel. Yeah, it's really Darrel, I didn't know we would have ululators in the audience this evening, but I'm so glad we do, yeah. I just want to tell you, anytime you feel the urge to ask a question during our conversation, don't hesitate. Darrel, you'll answer questions about anything.
I will.
I realize there may be 3 people in the room who've read the book. Darrel, and me, and Jorge. So I realize, you may not be able to ask book-specific questions, but anything about the craft and perhaps the switch from what he wrote before into fiction. And was there any fiction in what he wrote before in his memoirs? Oh, no, sorry. But first of all, because I would imagine that you have not yet read it, I'd like to ask Darrel to read the very opening paragraph, which is amazing. And you're saying yes?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, good, okay.
But first I have to introduce myself in my language.
Please.
Darrel Sigaso, Wahia Otinia, Amiswachi Maskaigonotinia, Doris Bertha Negui, Sunny Clifford Notui. So I just told you where I'm from and who my parents are. That's our traditional way of introducing yourselves.
Hi.
Yeah, and it's a true honor, as Sheila said, I'm just so moved and grateful that you made this choice to come out tonight. And I see so many wonderful faces of people I love.
For you, wouldn't miss it.
Yeah, so the first chapter, not the next chapter, the first chapter.
Well, we'll get to that.
It's called Chezgh'un, Spring. He dreamed about it yet again, his great-grandfather's trapping cabin where he spent his earliest years. Oddly shaped and built with huge glass windows and cedar instead of pine, almost no right angles, trapezoids on all sides, a cathedral ceiling. The roar of clashing currents at the confluence of 2 unequal rivers, shimmering rapids, standing waves and eddies. In the center of a meadow, a colorful canvas teepee, crimson-tipped Indian paintbrush all around, scattered in the clearing that surrounded the cabin, animal hides stretched across frames made of bamboo canes, with unmistakable knobby round knuckles. One hide was vast with long shaggy fur, an appendage like an elephant trunk hanging down. The second had a ferocious head with yellow dagger-like canines protruding from its mouth, golden fur with brown markings, a stubby tail. The third hide was that of a gigantic bison, plush fur. A man and a woman, both elderly, stood by a roaring fire, its base contained by large stones, sparks spitting into the air and flying. A spiraling haze of smoke, the precious and ingrained odor of wood burning. James stood across the fire opposite the couple who spoke Cree, smiling and giggling, and he responded in kind. At times, the 3 of them spoke and laughed in near unison.
And there it begins. Thank you. I think immediately you take us into this place. You make it a very sensual experience, I would say, throughout your novel. But in this particular instance, it's a dream. And I wonder, first of all, I'm going to ask how important dreams are to you.
Well, not just for me personally, dreams are essential. I mean, they guide me, they inform me, they inspire me, they bless me. And in Cree culture as well, we're taught to listen to our dreams because we get messages from deep within ourselves, from the spirit world, from our ancestors, and so on. So, in fact, the last chapter of my second memoir, Piegao, a huge section is the result of a dream.
In this particular dream, what is James to learn from this dream as we begin the story?
I had an interesting conversation with a friend who's a fellow author, and we talked about, whether it's important for people to understand what a passage means or a sentence. Like, should they be able to grasp them? And you say, oh, that, and they could cite it, A, B, and C. These are the 3 points in this chapter. And I told him that I've come to the conclusion that the effect is more important than understanding the words or the sentences of a paragraph or the meaning of the words, sentences, and paragraphs. The effect. So I think that dream had an effect on James that took him back, that transcended his present reality and took him back to a place where he really, really needed to be, with not great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents, but with ancestors that went far beyond that.
Why did he need to be there, in that place?
Because his world had been turned upside down, I think. And he was feeling displaced. He was in Vancouver and doing well and successful in a career, been through the education system and done well, had a teaching career, was successful, but he felt so removed from his culture and his people and his family.
It's really cool to be talking to you in Vancouver, where we are just minutes away from many of the places that are mentioned in the book. And James and his partner, Franyo, are reading the Saturday paper. And James is looking at the career section. And he sees something that sets the action in motion. Can you talk about what he sees and then what he does?
He saw 2 things. One was an ad for 2 principalships in a community, an indigenous community in northern BC. And the other article was a frontline article about an action that was happening in the central interior BC where a rancher had chased indigenous people off his land for picking berries. They were gathering and hunting, and he chased them off of his lands and forbade them to come on. So those 2 things got, one kind of inspired James and one pissed him off.
Yeah. So James, describe James's life when we first meet him. How is he living his life here in Vancouver?
Well, he's doing well. I mean, he has a circle of friends that he really adores, and he's astonished that these people have accepted him because they're professionals and they're from different cultural backgrounds. And, none of them are indigenous, but not all of them are white. So he has this eclectic group of friends, and not a huge circle, but he's accepted by them. And he's astonished that he's been able to complete a university degree, astonished that he got a job teaching for the Vancouver School Board, and astonished that here he is with this amazing group of friends.
And he is with a wonderful and loving partner as well.
Absolutely.
Tell us about Franyo.
Well, Franyo is a really interesting character in the book who is always there for James and always supports him and provides a type of stability for James that James hasn't known much in his life. And he's always there and always available and always supportive. And he's in a situation where, it was a really interesting time for same-sex couples then, because it was before same-sex marriages were allowed.
This is the 80s.
This is the 80s, yeah. And so relationships were quite informal and quite loose and loosely structured for the most part. And so it was kind of a trial run, but the connection, it was really interesting that later in the book, you see a place that explains the romanticism that Franjo held for indigenous people. And it's very typical of different European cultures. For example, German culture, French culture. And so the book really gets to the roots of where that was from. It was a comic series about Chief Winnetou.
Who was
Fictitious.
yeah.
And so, and that was part of it. So Franjo had this fascination with indigenous people, and James wondered if Franjo would take him on as a project.
Yeah. Oh gosh, Sandy, go ahead, and I'm going to repeat it. So
So good to see you here, Sandy.
You're fluent in your language?
No, I'm not, unfortunately. My parents all were fluent, and my aunts and uncles.
What dialect is that?
It's the
It's,
White dialect.
What?
Sandy's just asked if Darrel's fluent in his language. I'm going to repeat the questions. I know most of you can probably hear it, but just in case, okay? So thanks, Sandy. That's great. Thank you very much. Yeah. Do you just picking up on Sandy's question? Do you feel a sense of loss? Is it something that you're going to pursue more fully to really learn the language?
Oh, it's a horrible sense of loss, because my mother was always proud of speaking Cree, Nehio, and she told us from a young age to be proud of who we are, that we're Nehio. And I'm one of the fortunate people who knew their entire lives that they were Nehio. And I grew up hearing the language, and I love that I was able to incorporate in all of my books, and able to incorporate Cree to some extent, but I incorporated it the way I know it. I didn't get it, I didn't run it by any academics or anything like that to check the spelling or check the pronunciation or the way I'd written it. I wrote it the way I knew it, because I wanted to portray historically where somebody who has every will in the world, every wish in the world to be fluent, and this is the state I'm in. So yeah, it's a huge sense of loss. Mom, whenever she was in a situation, my mother, whenever she was in a situation where she could speak Cree, she would speak Cree. And if my grandmother or an auntie started in English, she'd switch to Cree and hold the language in Cree. Yeah, so James was similar. He's not Darrel, but there are parallels. And James was very proud of being Nehia, being Cree, and he was intrigued to get up to this community in northern BC where people speak Dak'kel. And the kids, there's one section that I just love where the kids are asking him to show us what it sounds like. You know, you can talk, they called it talking Indian because, you know, we were all painted with the same, tarred with the same brush. You could have been Haida in Haida Gwaii or Mi'kmaq from the East Coast or Nehia from the prairies, or Stalo from the interior of BC, but you were Indian. And that's all people knew, was that you're Indian. So these little kids said, well, talk Indian to us. They said that to James as a new principal, and they loved comparing their languages back and forth. And James was astonished to see. I mean, intellectually, he knew there were different language groups across Canada, but a neighboring cultural group where the language has nothing to do, there's not a remote similarity. It's like Irish to Swahili, you know, it's that distinct.
So yeah, Cree to Dak'kel. Yeah. So we know from your answer, thank you again, Sandy, to Sandy's question, that James does take this job. But I just want to go back a second. James is happy in Vancouver. He's got stability for the first time in his life. And he's about to enter into a situation that's going to be very unstable. What is the pull that takes him there, away from this beautiful life that he has here in Vancouver?
Well, he wanted so badly. I'm just going to step back into this.
Let's just keep stepping back.
Work of fictional characters.
Yeah.
And somebody told me, it may have been my mentor, Shayna Lambert. I just want to acknowledge Shayna Lambert here. She's and Caroline Anderson is mentioned in the acknowledgements because
That's wonderful.
I was accepted to the Writers' Studio in Banff in 2018 to work on this book. And Caroline was
You
one of
have, it
the
doesn't sound yet like you've changed it that much, so it's fantastic. I remember it.
Yeah, the beginning is fairly similar,
Yes,
but
yes.
yeah,
I follow you completely.
but somebody, it may have been you, Shayna, that told me that characters in fiction take on a life of their own, and they tell you what they want to happen and how they want to be. And I was kind of skeptical. I thought, okay, well that sounds interesting, we'll see. But they do tell you.
Yeah.
And so James.
You taught me so much, Darrel.
Oh,
That's
thank
the
you.
truth of it. Yeah. Just to set the record straight.
But James has this yearning to be back in his homeland so badly, to be connected with the land. He talks about, he couldn't tell his partner Franny this or anybody of his other close friends. He dreamt about buying back the land that had been taken from his family. He dreamt about it regularly, and he used to dream about the little village where the area where his family lived, and they had been forcibly displaced. But he had this yearning to get back to his cultural homeland and to people like him, and to get back into the heart of nature and to be with indigenous people, to be with other indigenous people. And he got a job. It wasn't in a Cree community. It wasn't in his own. God knows. I think if I put my application in to be a principal in Northern Alberta, I still wouldn't get hired.
Why not?
Just too much discrimination. There's still too much racial discrimination. One of my cousins, I'm proud to say, and she wouldn't mind me telling you this, is the head janitor of the school. And for our family, we just feel that's a phenomenal accomplishment that she got to be the head janitor of the school. But James wants so badly to get back to his homeland, and he didn't even apply for jobs in Alberta. He applied for jobs all over, everywhere else. And he got this job in northern British Columbia.
Have you read Valley of the Bird Tale?
No.
By Stobo Snyderman and Douglas Sanderson.
Excellent book. Excellent.
It is excellent. Caroline Adderson also says that it's excellent. So it's the story of an indigenous, a First Nation, and then right across the valley is a Ukrainian-Canadian community. The difference between the two schools, and then a teacher, I'm just really giving a thumbnail here, but a teacher comes over from the Ukrainian-Canadian school, and he actually ends up being principal at the First Nation, and he is appalled by what he sees. He sees that there's no equity in funding, there's chronic underfunding, which you talk about in the book, and it's just, there's no level playing field. And how do you expect kids to get ahead when you don't even support the textbooks that they have, or any of the infrastructure? You actually brought it with you?
Yeah, Valley of the Bird.
Aren't you amazing? How did that happen? Yeah, I think, anyway, I will say, if you've read Valley of the Bird Tale, you will love a season in
Chezgh'un.
There you are. Yeah. But he comes up. He does take this job. What meets him when he gets there?
Well, he's thinking that it's going to be all love and bliss. And there is love and there is bliss, fortunately. And it's rich. But there's also poverty, tragedy, and sadness. But it's the beauty of the people and the beauty of the land, not only the physical beauty of the people, but the spiritual beauty of the people and the way they love him and embrace him that carries him through.
He meets a number of elders, and I found it really interesting, Darrel, that you really establish a voice for everybody. And I mean, I want to ask you, do you hear voices? But I'm not going to be that cheap.
I'm hearing the voice of Sheila Rogers.
Get it while you can.
It's a miracle. It's magical, beautiful, it's wonderful.
But I really, without even looking, I think I could tell who was speaking. What is your ear for dialogue? How did you develop it?
Well, when I grew up in the bush, where we had no electricity, no running water until I was about 7 years old. And we lived in my great-grandfather's trapping cabin. That's the story in the both Mamaskatch and Hugo, well, and Mamaskatch. And so storytelling was big. The only outside contact we had for entertainment was listening to the radio. Somebody would bring a car battery, and they'd hook up an old radio to the car battery, and we'd listen to story time, sometimes after dinner, or on Sunday nights. And so sitting around talking stories, telling stories and talking, not only telling stories, but visiting, talking. I remember people sitting around, you know, just like thinking about the future, much like we do right now. People then thought the future was bleak. People then thought the future was bleak, but so they'd sit around, you know, and talk about, gee, so what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And now I just can't imagine what my parents and grandparents would be saying, and how they would be wringing their hands and concerned about where the future of humanity is going. But so everyone had a voice, and everybody told stories, and everybody was a storyteller. And I love one section of the book that I was able to bring out, I think in a rich way, was the bullshitting contest. So we had bullshitting contests back home, and they had bullshitting contests up in northern BC, and it was sitting around the fire night, that was something you did. And it was a contest to see who could go on the longest before somebody would call bullshit. And then they'd have to tell whether, up to that point, whether the story was true or not.
I love it.
Now I start doing that at political rallies.
Very wise. I know you have another reading for us. Would you like to introduce it? Sure. Okay.
For my grandpa glasses.
Oh,
And more
well, I just
so
have them
glasses.
pasted into my face now, so.
So one of the things that, I won't set it up really a lot, because there would be some spoilers in it if we did that. So the school is at a fish camp at a lake, and it's a traditional site of the community. And so some of the characters that you'll hear about would be Debbie, who's the primary grade teacher. Harry is teaching the high school program, and Catherine is Catherine Bird, who's an elder, who's there teaching language, and she's also James's friend and guide. Day one of the fish camp featured kite making, something James had done at his Vancouver school, though here there would be no power lines to worry about. The weather was perfect and looked like it would stay that way. A clear blue sky from the forested hilltops to the horizon it formed with the lake. The gentle fall breeze kept everyone cool and refreshed. The songbirds were singing in full voice, as if to squeeze in every moment of life they could before autumn set in and they had to fly south. James spotted Art, huddled in conversation with Debbie, Harry, and Loretta. Art is one of the teacher aides at the school. Debbie and Harry are teachers, and so is Loretta. Art had them laughing. Good. By early afternoon, kites and more kites were flying high in the air along the wide sandy beach and in the grassy meadow that led up to the hill covered by berry bushes, including the simpler ones the primary class had assembled. Children ran, strode, and chattered gleefully, looking up in amazement at the kites they had spent the morning decorating and assembling. They'd used the ovoid patterns typical of duck elf culture and painted them red or black against a white background. The banter and joyful noise happy children everywhere make while at play. James felt at home. Honey, look at mine. Going so high, gonna blow away. Teacher, help me with the string, getting tangled. Oh, mine fell down, gotta get it back up. As he watched colorful kites bobbing up and down, twirling and rotating, tails flying wildly in response to the same cool breeze he felt on his bare arms, James sighed contentedly. That activity was a hit. Parent volunteers were on hand and keen to help. Many of them had only seen kites on TV, in books, or comics, so the novelty was exciting for them too. They spoke duck elf to the kids as best they could to explain how the parts fit together. Who knew how to say the names of the various parts in their language? Frame, flying line, bridle, spine, tail, and string, on the other hand, were obvious. He watched Debbie grasp the hand of a little girl who had struggled to hold onto the kite string and walk along the beach without falling. Right after lunch, he saw Harry gather a group of teenagers in the shallow section of the lake and was showing them how to do canoe-over-canoe rescue. His big accomplishment was convincing some of the macho boys that they needed to wear a life jacket while in the craft or in the water. James breathed a sigh of relief when he saw Harry smiling and laughing as he interacted with the teenage girls. They've won him over already, he thought, and how could they not with those smiles? As planned, Catherine was leading a bannock and frybed workshop for a group of teenagers in the cook tent. Each of them was kneading an amoeba-like wad of white dough in a large stainless steel bowl. Wearing an improvised apron, James moved in closer, nodded hello to Catherine. "Howdy, James, Suinto," Catherine said. The girls chuckled at this. "Suasto." "I'm fine," James answered. At this, the girls' eyebrows went up. "James, these girls are amazing. Shannon here talks Dalkel and knows how to make real good bannock all on her own. The other girls are learning fast too." James caught a glimpse of Shannon's gaze. Her eyes were vibrant, bright and eager, full of a joie de vivre he hadn't often seen anywhere. Laura, the exiting teacher, was right. She's a special one for sure. Shannon must have felt that she was being observed. She regarded him for just a second before looking at the ground again. In another part of the cook tent, Laura was teaching a different group of teens, boys and girls, how to prepare roasted beaver tail. James remembered his mother telling him it was her favorite delicacy growing up, and he couldn't wait to taste it. He watched as the teens removed 4 black, slightly puffed up beaver tails from the grill. They'd been cooked on racks over hot coals in the fire pit, then sliced down the middle of the bottom side. The first, a layer of skin which now looked like snake skin, was pulled away, and the same for another layer, which was also thin, but pink and fleshier. "Sa-che," Sally said, and the students repeated the word. Sa is beaver, and che is tail, or the end of something. She handed James a small chunk on a piece of bannock. It looked like fat or gelatin, but it smelled so good. James immediately grasped why his mother had liked it so much. It reminded him of salmon belly, or the Pope's nose of a turkey, rich, unctuous, like bone marrow, with more texture and a delicate aquatic flavor. Dinner was served, half-smoked sockeye steamed in tin foil to complete its cooking, served with steamed quartered potatoes or rice, a piece of beaver tail and a chunk of bannock, dried moose meat, deer stew, boiled mixed veggies, and a simple tossed salad. There was a jar of lukewarm bear grease to drizzle over everything, and that's what everyone was doing. This was something new. James was sure it was great nutrition, but his belief that bears are sacred animals kept him from enjoying it as the others seemed to do. After dinner, James got out his guitar and led some singing around the campfire. He knew they would like country music, so he played the songs his mother used to sing. He started with "Jambalaya, Crawfish Pie, and a Philly Gumbo" by Hank Williams. Everyone knew the words to that one. Then Roger Miller's "Trailers for Sale or Rent, Rooms to Let," and "I Walk the Line" by Johnny Cash. I can't know that name. A couple of guys called out for him to play some Georgie Jones songs. He struggled to remember the chords and lyrics to "The Race Is On" and "She Thinks I Still Care." Then he recalled the song his mother used to sing in Cree, "Kaiwi Kats Piagun Tapskochnia," her translation of the Hank Williams song, "May You Never Be Alone Like Me." That song brought a tear to his eye. He thought about Franio back in Vancouver. He didn't want to get more emotional. He switched to happier songs, ones he thought the kids would like Puff the Magic Dragon and Rocket Robin.
Oh, beautiful.
Thank you very much.
You write beautifully about food, I have to say. Yeah. Also, and I don't want to give anything away, but there is some attention to our humble rodent throughout the novel. There's beaver.
It's not a humble rodent, it's on the back of the Canadian nickels. It was a Canadian animal.
Oh yeah, and it has a starring scene right at the end, which just we can't go there. But what I found really interesting, James's life, of course, books, once he gets up to the north, isn't just about coffee at the Blue Parrot and the Granville Market. And he's in nature. He is surrounded. He's surrounded by four-leggeds and two-leggeds and winged ones and finned ones. And what does this world open up for him?
Well, he realizes that there's an amazing richness in this culture that is unique to any other culture in the world. And, I've said this before, so I'm repeating myself, but a beauty that he didn't see anywhere else with any other people in the world. A unique, precious beauty. And along with that, the difference goes the difference in the diet. So it opens up a whole new world to him of experience. He'd never tasted beaver tail before, but he'd heard his mom talk about it. And he wanted to taste it so badly. And by the way, beaver tail was used, I don't know if people know this, but there's a gland underneath the tail that was harvested, castor, to flavor soups. High-level chefs used to want it harvested. And it's also used in perfumes.
Wow.
It was. Hence sort of
Musk. Yeah.
the near extinction of the beaver because of the demand for the fur and the demand for the castor gland.
Wow.
Yeah. But it opens up a whole new universe for him, which is, you'll see in the book, is a good thing and a blessing, and he's entranced by it and intrigued and seduced by it, but at the same time he's afraid of it. But he's afraid that he'll get drawn in and never leave, never want to leave.
I want to ask you about the students that he goes up to teach. It's funny, I was actually telling my niece, Angela, today about your book, and she said, "Oh, is it about school?" And I said, "Well, it's about teaching more than school, I think." And she said, "I wasn't any good at school." And I thought, school wasn't any good at you. And this is where James is so amazing. He gets there and understands he's just got to blow up all of the four square walls. So what does he want to do?
Well, he wants to validate the students. He sees the intelligence, the richness of the culture, and he knows that the students have the capacity to do amazing things. And amazing things are different for everyone, right? So amazing things could mean academic accomplishments, and certainly a lot of the students have that ability, and they showed that as time went on. But it could mean becoming a great carver, could be becoming a great musician, a great visual artist, a great storyteller, and so on. And he recognized that, and he knew that there was this capacity in that community. And so he wanted, first of all, to bring that out to the greatest extent possible. And he understood the effect of foreign education system in introducing that, because he felt that he had been incredibly assimilated in his 12 years of school and then 5 years of university. And actually, it seems that he resents it. I didn't really flesh that out in the book, but and so he wants to meet the students where they're at and the community where they're at, and he wants to understand the community's goals for their own kids, for their own youth and people. What do they want to accomplish? It's not what outside society wants of them or thinks they should accomplish. So he wants to sort of understand what the community wants and needs, and then he wants to help them meet that by using, the tools and skills that he has as an educator, and by using, the educational system the best he can.
And he's a bit of a curriculum junkie, right?
Totally.
He loves making curricula.
Right.
What's that about? Does he just nerd out?
Well, in a way, because he just saw so much potential. And he had, a startup budget for this school. It's mentioned in there that the chief was able to negotiate a startup budget for the schools. And so he had this money to spend. And he just canvassed local talent, indigenous people in Prince George and in Fort St. Pierre and other places. And and he found an indigenous woman who had her own hairdressing studio, and great, we'll bring her to do workshops on hairdressing, and the kids will become stylists. Not that they're going to have careers, but they'll do styling around the community. He brought a chef in to teach the kids how to bake better things and how to make soups, and so on. And drum making workshops. And what he was kind of nerdy because he had this very specific idea of how he would bring the kids into an academic setting. So start with the things that they would love, activities that they would love, and that would be nurturing for them, and slowly introduce the academics.
He's up against some opposition, though, from teachers and vice principals who are already in the place, where they insist they've got to learn the 3 R's and then they can build on it. Was that something perhaps you might have experienced?
Not really, because I taught in Vancouver.
Yeah.
I taught in Vancouver, and I taught French immersion, and I had great supports, and the curriculum was always rich, and it was always innovative, and that sort of thing. So I personally didn't face that. But James, up north, is being told by people who don't understand culture, non-Indigenous people, that, you know, the parents can teach the culture at home. The parents can teach the language at home. In school, they need to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. Leave the cultural stuff out. And so, you know, James had to convince people over. Luckily, his bosses were on side with him, and they pretty well gave him free rein.
Yeah.
But it was other folks who were saying that they didn't really understand why culture had any place in the school.
Unbelievable, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Wonderful. Hi.
Yes, why do you feel that you want to write a novel?
Why do you feel you want to write a novel
That's what that you feel that can't be told in nonfiction.
that can't be told in nonfiction? Yeah, thank you. That's a question that's been begging to be asked. Thank you.
And there are a few answers, or a multi-faceted answer to that question. I wrote 2 memoirs, and I was lucky to have them both published, and who gets to write a 3rd memoir? So that's one thing. The other thing is that fiction allows you to do things that you can't do in memoir. Memoir it's not quite autobiography, where you don't have to be completely faithful to events and times and happenings and characters. You have a little bit of wiggle room in memoir as opposed to autobiography. However, memoir still limits you. You can't make up this plot that just goes wherever it needs to go. The plot is basically your life story, and how you portray that life story can form an interesting plot line, and I had to do that in both Mama Sketch and Piego. But writing fiction allows you to really open up to a different muse, to your muse in a different way, in a much, much broader way. And I learned that as I was writing. I didn't think that when I went into writing fiction. For example, there are things in the book that are included that if I were to be writing my life story, I wouldn't have been able to include them. And you get to develop characters that, you know, maybe a conflation of people who've influenced your life, maybe a conflation of characters you've known out in the world, but they may be completely imaginary as well, which is the beauty of you're open to anything. One day I was sitting in the coffee shop in Souk. I live in Souk, and I was sitting there writing, and all of a sudden there was a fire, and I said, "Oh my God!" And I literally jumped out of my chair and said, "There's a fire!" And then so I sat back down and had to write this fire scene. Sorry, it's a little bit of a spoiler. And then, you know, the characters, as I was saying earlier, just took on an incredible life of their own, and that can't really happen. And you can understand your characters better in memoir, the people who've been in your life. You understand them better when you're doing your memoir, but fiction just opens the world up.
And the characters told you where they wanted to go.
They led me by the hand.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. As I read your novel, I felt that's Darrel McLeod writing, so that your voice is there. But as you were writing fiction, did you have to avoid reading other fiction so that other authors' voices, Caroline, Shayna, didn't enter into...
I'd be flattered and honored if their voices crept into my work, and Denise as well. But early in my writing career, I did avoid reading too much of any one author because I really was worried about falling into their patterns. Richard Wagamese is the only exception. I devoured every book of his that I could find when I began my writing career. But other than that, no, early in my writing career I was worried about that, but now I just read fastly and consume. I've decided to start keeping a reading journal, actually, just to keep track of. But it's interesting now, it isn't the voice so much that influences my writing, but I get these amazing ideas about structure, about word usage. Like one little trick that I did in this book that I wasn't able to do before was in my readings, I love books that make me go to a dictionary or make me go online to Google and look up the meaning. And so I've kept a list of words that I love, not only words that puzzle me, but words that I love. And I kept a list of I have about a list, maybe 100 words, and I want to slip them into my writing. Mm-hmm. And so after I was on about draft 6 of Season in Chezgh'un, I knew it was time to do that, so I got on my list. And you'll see them.
I had to ask Darrel what one particular word means. Oniric, am I saying it right?
Yeah.
Related to dreams, right?
Right,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can say it for me.
Oniric.
Oniric.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's similar in French.
Yeah.
Isn't it a word in English?
Oh, it certainly is.
Yeah.
I just didn't know it. But, no, I'd never heard it before. I mispronounced it in my head and all sorts of things. But
Yay, that part worked.
That you wouldn't have heard it.
If you knew me better, you wouldn't be surprised.
I know you better than you say.
Thank you.
People say that to me too, and I don't know why. 2 memoirs out there.
But how lovely you can do that. Just let that stuff flow in, right?
Well, there's that old saying, there's a fine line between love and hate, and I would say there's a fine line between fiction and nonfiction as well. And it all comes from our subconscious, right? And and it was interesting when I was writing my memoir, my first memoir, Mama Scotch, I worked with my first mentor, Betsy Moreland, who I adore, become a great friend. And at a certain stage, we had a manuscript, and she thought I needed to go deeper. So she referred me to our friend, Shayna Lambert. And Shayna was busy, as she always is, and I had to wait about 9 months, but it worked out. And we worked together about 1.5 years. And Shayna just helped me to take things deeper and richer. In particular, I remember the way she taught me to work with scene, to be conscious of scenes that I was creating. If I just wanted a brief scene, to do it deliberately. But if I needed a full scene, I knew how to write a full scene. And she also coached me on how to incorporate dialogue, which may seem strange in a memoir, but we did it.
Have you paid that forward? Are you a mentor now?
Yes, to my surprise. I'm a mentor and a little bit of an editor. I don't want to do editing, but I got convinced to do a little bit. But yes, I've mentored names that you recognize. Helen Knott.
Wow.
With the,
Congratulations.
yeah, she's become a friend.
Yeah.
And it was with a prize that doesn't exist anymore, the RBC Charles Taylor Prize for Nonfiction.
Yes.
And she was identified as a rising star, and they assigned her to me to be her mentor. And I mean, as a mentor, I learned from Shayna and Betsy, the best thing you can do is just bring people along. Like, they're already on the right path, they already have all the richness. You just help them be confident in their own voice and in their own process.
Helen Knott is the author of In My Own Moccasins,
Yes.
And this fall she has a new book out called Becoming a Matriarch.
That's right, and it's doing very well. It's been on a bestseller list for 6 weeks.
Wow.
She's a friend and a sister,
Yeah.
a younger sister, but a sister. And Joseph Chezgh'un, another Cree man, and I got assigned to mentor him through the Writers' Trust when I was finalist for the Writers' Trust Prize for Nonfiction. And I got to choose who I wanted to mentor, and I went through volumes and volumes and volumes of writing by dozens of authors. And I ended up with Joseph because I had been a judge in a CBC short story prize a couple of years earlier, and his story just stuck with me, and I just couldn't get his text out of my mind. And it's worked out so well. My Indian Summer has done incredibly well. And my agent has taken him on as one of her writers, and is really confident in his work. And one of my great friends is his editor. You know who you are. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
It's been fun. That's been really special. It's been really precious. And that came to me. I didn't go looking for that. And I mean, I'll do it more into the future if I'm asked to, but I want to write.
Could I get back to ask you a question about the book, because I'm looking at the time. When you chose this and you chose him to be a teacher in the North, was it not only him, but did you also picture a novel of the benefits of a teacher doing a wonderful job that it wasn't done, you know, as we know in the history? Am I explaining correctly? I mean, did you see a big picture of a teacher that loved it and he loved his kids and what education could be that it wasn't?
Did everybody hear the question?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I guess really does he live up to his ideals, or?
I think did you have two goals? One, you had your character that he developed as he
Yes.
went there, but did you also have one about seeing him as a teacher, that he loved what he was doing, and education with indigenous children, when it's done correctly out of love, could have better benefits?
Thank
and
you.
happy-
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I get the question. That's a wonderful question.
Thank you very much.
I don't know who said this, but somebody said, write what you know.
Yeah.
And so it was very natural for me to write about education in an educational setting. And I, through my elementary school, junior high, and high school years, had a good experience overall. I had some teachers who were amazingly caring and really fostered my growth and development. Along beautifully, I call them my angels, actually. There were about 3 through my school career. And the last one being my music teacher in high school, David Ferguson. So I had a positive experience as an Indigenous kid, from a poor family, a dirt poor family, the poorest family in town. I had a positive experience, and I knew it was possible. And I came out the other end content with what had happened overall. So first of all, yes, I wanted to write what I knew, which is the education setting and the education process. But I also wanted to make it a bit of a dream, an ideal dream, to show what can be done. And to remind people, I mean, there are so many stories that people tell about stereotypes, right, of us being down and out and bums and drunks on the street. Those stereotypes are all too common. And I wanted to show that an educator whose heart is in the right place and who's thinking and lucid will recognize the strengths in Indigenous students wherever they are. And also, creative programming. Sure, we have, the curriculum is set by the BC government, and then even schools in First Nations communities are supposed to be following provincial curriculum, etc. And yes, it is possible to follow curriculum, but still be amazingly creative in your teaching. And so that's what I wanted to show, that it can be done. And it can be done holistically. It can be a holistic thing where you're thinking about mind, spirit, and soul, and not just these, kids in seats that you have to, spoon feed. The 3 R's.
Sorry, Yvonne, you go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I just had a question and a thought, and I was wondering if you've ever translated your books in your language, Cree. I was thinking about your mom and just like all of the Cree people in the world, and if that's something that you're thinking about, or if that's something that
Have you ever translated your work into Cree for the Cree people? And is that something, in your mother's language, is that something that you would consider?
Well, again, that's a multifaceted answer. First of all, Cree historically is we have an oral tradition, not a written tradition. And even if I were able to, and it would be very time consuming, I wouldn't be able to do it personally, I'd have to hire somebody. But there wouldn't be a lot of people who would be able to read it. I'd rather, it's out in Audible. And if somebody could do a translation for it to be out in audio in Cree, that would be phenomenal, that would be rich. But what I was able to do, we're making advances that we make are incremental, that Indigenous people make in validating ourselves and advancing our lives. So I was able to, and I'm so proud of this, that I was the first person ever, anywhere in the world, to give the title of my book an Indigenous name, Mamaskatch, the Cree word Mamaskatch. And as far as I know, that's the first time anybody has given the title of their book, has made it an Indigenous word, and I did the same for Piagao. And I also incorporated Cree untranslated into the book for a very specific reason. I wanted people to feel how perplexed you can be when somebody is bringing this language to you that you don't know and just expecting you to understand it.
Yeah. Right. I'd like a round of applause on that. Okay, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so James, he lived a successful life by any measure, but he felt like something is missing, something important, and that feelings make him go and look for it somewhere. Did he found it?
By any measure, James is living a very successful life, but he feels something is missing. He goes out to look for it. Does he find it? Is that fair? Okay. Yeah.
I think he finds it, but he's scared. Once he sees it staring him in the face, he's scared of it. And in fact, one of the elders, a wise woman named Monique, who's a seer, tells him this. She says, "You're afraid." She could see that he was afraid of being engulfed by the culture, being absorbed by duck health culture, and of falling in love with the people in the place. So yes, he did see it. And he did. Did he get overall, did he fulfill his goals? It seems that he did in the book, but he's going on to look for more.
Yeah, hi, Tamara. Nice to see you.
So did you read the audiobook version? Because you're a great reader. So
Did you read the audiobook?
Did you-
Version.
No, I was invited to for Mamaskatch and Piagao, and I declined just because I was writing who I want to write. And I would have had to go to Montreal or New York for at least 2 weeks to do the recording back then. That's what they told me anyway. And there's some great readers out there.
But for this
And I got a
one,
great
you
reader.
should read this one.
I probably could.
Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing, is this is fiction, so I could read it. But with memoir, I would have relived a lot of the stuff, the content, and it would have heard. In fact, Helen Knott, and I know she wouldn't mind me saying this because she posted this on Facebook, that she got convinced to read her own book. This current one.
Yeah.
And she said it broke her up.
Wow.
It was so hard. I mean, 2 weeks later she wrote that she was okay now, she's recovered. But it really rocked her world to read her own memoir.
Yeah. The sands of time have run through the hourglass. Of course, I want to know if you're going to write more fiction.
I have a list of about 5 projects. I'm already working. The next book I'm working on, though, is going to be a bit genre busting, which seems to be a bit of a trend now. So it's going to be part personal essay, excerpts from my journal, excerpts from news articles, excerpts from interviews that I've done, including with you, and excerpts from interviews with people like Billy Ray Belcourt, Joshua Whitehead, and things that I learned after, I went on a tour with Mamaskatch. I was in Southeast Asia, I was in the United States, and most of the major centers in the US, and interviewed by amazing people who came up with really astute questions. I learned so much about myself and so much about my writing. And so the next book is going to be sort of all that glommed together. It's called The Days After and the Days Before.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is that true for you as you send your book out into the world? does it become ours then?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of my university professors, we were talking about visual art, and I was asked, she gave a certain interpretation of the art, and I said, what do you think the artist would think of that interpretation? And she said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't belong to him anymore. And that's the way it goes. I put it out there, and people take what they will.
Darrel, thank you so much. Again, I love speaking with you, and I do regret Richard's not here to read your novel. I think he would have loved it. I really do. But the copies of A Season in Chez, there's a little T right before the CH.
That's right.
Chezgh'un, are for sale. Massey Books. Patricia is there, ready to help you, and you'll be signing.
Yes.
And I want to thank you so much. Thanks Sandy for starting off the questions, and thank you everybody.
We'll see each other again.
Beautiful. I hope so. Not soon enough. Safe travels home. Thank you.